It's not sustainable to have to spend 2 months a year begging people for money. We have to figure out alternative ways of financing serious independent journalism.
This isn't something that you get into because you want to have a career or because you think you're going to be famous or you want to make money. It's got to be something that burns in your heart. And I think that's part of the problem with journalism schools today, especially with the state of the economy, especially with the state of the newspaper industry. And it seems appropriate in a place like this, where the sanctuary, where it's all about community media. It's all about trying to capture that fire that is the desire to be a rebel journalist, or to be an independent journalist, or to do this simple thing that should be viewed as a trade, not as a career. And that is trying to provide people with actionable intelligence, information that can be translated into action, so that people are informed and can make decisions on how they want to translate their own emotions or their feelings or their beliefs into something that's going to contribute to building a better society. And the goal of independent media actually should be quite simple. You want to provide people with accessible information. You want to provide people with an opportunity to hear the voices of those who live on the other side of the barrel of the gun, that is U.S. foreign policy or domestic policy. But you also want to hold those in power accountable. Those are the three fundamental tenets of independent media. And I think that the best places to learn that are places like community media outlets, cable access television. People make fun of it, but if we don't defend it, we lose it, and the airwaves are public. And places like this.
I basically, what happened is that I was working at a homeless shelter and listening to the radio all the time, and I heard this woman on the radio, and I was like, wow, I've never heard anything like this. She's talking about the campaign to overthrow Mobutu Sese Seko and the sanctions on Iraq, and then I'm hearing about protests in the United States, and I look her up, and it's Amy Goodman, never heard of her before, and I wrote her an actual handwritten letter. She didn't respond to it, and I wrote her another one, and then eventually I went to an event that she was speaking at, and came up to her afterwards, and I started stalking her, basically. And I think she had to decide whether or not to, let me come in and volunteer or to get a restraining order against me. And luckily, she didn't get a restraining order against me. But I would say to her, I'll walk your dog if you have a dog, or feed your cat, or wash your windows. And I think she thought I was a really oddball. But eventually, she let me come in, and I learned journalism sort of as a trade, as an apprentice. Mm-hmm. And I still list Democracy Now! As my university, on my, it belongs to me and the NSA, but it's my Facebook page. All of your Facebook pages also belong to the NSA, so. But anyway, so I learned journalism very much just by watching other journalists work. Many of the best journalists that I know are people that decided one day, you know what, I'm going to save up a little bit of money by working in some job that I really can't stand, but I'm going to save up that money and give it a shot. And I'm going to take myself seriously enough, even if I don't have an assignment, and I'll give myself assignments. And even if I'm just writing a newsletter back from wherever I am, I'm going to give this a real run for it. And some of the best journalists I know, that's how they got started in journalism.
No one ever is going to knock on your door and say, this is one of the premier issues of your day. You have to realize it yourself. If you look at the most repressive nations in the world, one of the staples of their repressive apparatus is collectively criminalizing huge groups of people. We see it with the Israeli treatment of the Palestinians. You see it with various dissident groups in China. And right here in the United States, we somehow think that we're immune to characterizations that are normally applied to repressive regimes. If you're a young black man or a young Latino man in the city of New York, you are facing down against a repressive regime that has collectively targeted your people. And I think, from the perspective of a reporter that does international human rights work, when you come back to the city that you live in and you see it, you have to apply the same lens to it. And in not doing that, it's part of this bogus American exceptionalism. America is not the exception when it comes to regimes around the world and the way that you treat your people. America, especially in the treatment of black people in this country from day one, has collectively targeted and punished African Americans. And
that the role of journalists is to hold those in power accountable, and to provide the public with information they can use to make informed decisions about which policies to support or which policies to oppose, which is our mission in life as journalists as well. So in the U.S., we have many generals, colonels, and others who are actively on the payroll of defense corporations that are making money off of U.S. wars. And if they're on CNN or any of the networks, and they're advocating for a particular military strategy that will benefit their corporations, that's extremely problematic, and I think it's very unethical. It's almost like a legitimized form of corruption when television networks invite private sector people on to advocate for their product without ever having to tell the viewer that that's what they're doing. And on top of that, saying, General so-and-so, Colonel so-and-so. It gives them this gravitas. When in reality, what they're primarily doing is functioning as a salesperson for their product or an advocate for their product that's going to make them money with a little bit of analysis drizzled over it, but that analysis is going to be consistent with whatever is going to make them money for their product in U.S. or international wars.
It's an interesting take. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do we ensure that we have voices that represent a diverse range of cultural, political views and voices, and trying to focus on having people from marginalized or excluded segments of society be given a prominent voice, and so that's what we're spending a lot of our time doing now is looking at the work of a wide range of young journalists and experienced journalists alike.
Right, because otherwise you end up just hiring privileged people who already have privilege or independently wealthy. Not always, but generally that's the pool that you have to pick from. Well, Jeremy.
Well, and I think young journalists should be given a chance. I mean, even if someone is rough around the edges. I mean, I was rough around the edges when I begged my way into working with Amy Goodman. She had no right. Of course, we all walk in. But again, coming back to it, what other institutions do we have besides these Pacifica stations that allow someone like you or me to kind of walk in one day and figure out how to finesse our way into working on a show? We were volunteers, but this was our university, for all of this. And I want that to be part of what we do at The Intercept too, is to give young people that chance where it burns in their heart and you're going to give them a chance to do it.